All righty, guys. Well, Coffee Experts Club, excited to be with you guys again this week. We're going to talk today about order to the chaos, Ben Clatterbuck. You know what I mean? Because nobody wants to live in that. Nobody wants to live in chaos,
No.
right? All of us want to move to better order in our lives. Life can be chaotic enough. We've been talking about, last week we talked about visionary and integrator relationship, or visionary and ops director, or visionary and COO, however you want to phrase it. But this week we're going to dig a little bit deeper in how we can help bring order to the business. Ben, if you had to throw out one thing, if you're just like one thing, why is an ordered meeting important? What do you think that it's important? Like if you're going to get your people together and you're going to have a meeting, why is it important to have order?
So it's not a giant waste of time.
I feel like if I had a nickel for every time I would do a follow-up meeting with Ben after a manager's meeting where there wasn't much order and he would come on, I could, we all have idiosyncrasies, right? And when you meet with somebody weekly for years on end, you can just know, right? I know that when Ben comes into a one-on-one, it's always going to start with, "Good day, sir." Like that's always that's number one. Number two, if it was going to be after a manager's meeting, I'd be like, "Hey man, so how'd the manager's meeting go?" And he'd be like, "What a total freaking waste of time." Like that was like the next words out of his mouth, only because there wasn't much order there. And it just got crazy. And the bigger and bigger your organization is, the more and more players that you have that you're actually working with, like that's a problem, Talk to me why wasted time is a big deal to you, Ben.
Because my hours are precious. My time is precious. Well, and especially when it comes to like a big organization, like every hour counts. And if you're spending 2 hours a day just doing nothing, but just like talking in circles with a bunch of, with 15, 16 people, and you leave and you're like, well, that was a good lunch, I suppose. Then you just lost 2 hours of productivity out of the day. And not only that, like if you're the owner operator, you're paying 15, 16 people all to be in a room to do nothing but talk in circles. That can be disheartening real quick.
I mean, that's one of the biggest things, right? Is, I know Drew, when you were getting ready to start your own thing, had some things in your own heart. I think that's always the biggest pain point, right? Especially when you first start is how much cash am I going to have to outlay? I mean, like, what's the number? What's the magic number? Because I've only saved so much. I'm going to invest so much. But then there's another side of that. Like, it's not only just when you're starting, but it's like you get downstream and you have 16 stores and you have 16 managers. And it's so big that you have to start breaking up when you do your managers meetings because the group is too large. Like really being aware of pulling the manager out of the stand costs you money. Right? Getting them into a room costs you money. Usually you're buying them some kind of meal, which costs you money. And then whatever time you're paying them to be there costs them money. And could they have been used to a better brilliance? I mean, like these are your top leaders of your organization. Could you have been using their time in a better way? Always has to be things that we're asking ourselves. So I think that spending money is definitely a huge one. Drew, do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's compounded over every single person. So it's not just 2 hours, it's 32 hours at 16 people, so it adds up quick. And those meetings,
work week. And it's not even your cheapest employees. Like it's the most expensive ones, right?
It's a high bill if there's not a lot of productivity to come out the other end of it.
Yeah, I love it. We're going to talk today about how to do ordered meetings and how different people do ordered meetings. And I think it's pretty important to acknowledge out of the gates that there's not one size that fits all. That you're going to want to be asking yourself, how can we morph whatever meeting style we're using into something that fits us best? I think that Human Being Reno has been a great example of that, of just like how we can morph a meeting style to what their culture is. But at the same time, it's really important that you have some sort of same speak is the way I would reference it. We lean pretty hard into EOS, which is Entrepreneur's Operating System. And when people hear the word operating system, a lot of times they can feel like, oh, we're talking computers. Or we're talking about platforms, or we're talking about, some sort of main brain that's digital. But really, in all honesty, the core of the whole thing is the operating system of your people. Like, how are your people operating? And a lot of that is just speaking the same language. Like all of us have had people that, we've been on customer support calls that it's clear that English is not their first language. And man, the disconnect that happens by not speaking the same language, you can waste even if you're the most gracious soul and you're like, I'm going to explain this to you 3 different ways to hopefully get you on the right page, like the time wasted in that is monumental, let alone in your business, if not everybody's using the same speak on how to talk about similar pain points and problems. So I think that obviously there's the issue of time. I also think that what goes into a good meeting from my perspective isn't just all of us come with the same intentionality, speaking the same language, but all speaking the same language, meaning from business perspective, but also looking at same metrics. Drew, I know you've been in metrics pretty deep for a while now. Like, what are your thoughts on looking at the same metrics consistently?
Well, if you have to relearn a spreadsheet every time you open it, you know, you're killing time each time. And I mean, I've been trying to learn to speak spreadsheet language for a while now. I outsource my knowledge to Ben sometimes, and you, Aaron. But yeah, once you get a language down, it streamlines the process in an insane amount. I was listening to a podcast a while back about how coffee started, and nobody was speaking the same language about how to measure out their shots or what they're calling their shots. And so the development was really slow. And when we all started, you know, speaking in grams and weighing things out and using similar terminology, it increased the speed times 10 at least.
Yeah, I think truthfully, I feel like if you can all agree on what are the consistent metrics we're going to track, it's then that you can begin to really hold people to those numbers, you know. But until then, if it's always a moving target, like this week, this number is important, and next week, this number is important, and next week, this number is important, or, you know, whatever the measuring is, then you leave your people always to feel like if you've ever been in a stick shift and somebody downshifts, you know, they're in 5th and they downshift too far and they get you all the way back to 3rd or 2nd, and then the screams, you know, just all wee, like that. You can see people like bracing for just the jerkiness of like shifting gears into the wrong spot of moving people, and they start getting whiplash from how erratic your emotions are. Because last week you told them this was the most important thing. Ben, you talked about this a little bit last week on our call. This was the most important thing to you last week. So I poured all of this time in this week to make sure we could really spend some time looking at these numbers this week. And then this week you're like, no, that doesn't really matter to me. Now it's this number. And when it's always a moving target, it's exhausting. Ben, you want to say something to that?
Yeah, not only that, but it's super defeating for your people. Right. They're like, I mean, a good worker, like a good employee is gonna be like, look, I did this great thing. You want to look at it together? I know this is really important to you, and I want to make sure that you know I'm doing a good job. If they bring that to you, you're like, nah, I don't care about it anymore. Actually, we're on to this number. Each time that happens, they're like, okay, my job doesn't matter. Okay, not important. Okay, what I'm doing is pointless. So consistency, if you're asking something of your people, especially when it comes to reporting or numbers or metrics, if you consistently ask for that and they deliver on that, it's small accomplishments that these people can have throughout the week, throughout the month, that actually makes them feel good about the position too.
And I think too, like you bring up a good point. Like, I think it's important not only to establish what are the consistent metrics we're going to watch every week moving forward. Every time we meet, maybe you don't meet weekly, maybe it's every couple of weeks, or maybe even it's once a month, whatever your set cadence is for your meetings. Like, to look at the same things every time gives people an expectation of what's important, you know, like what are the main things we should be watching. And I think you just took a next step further, and I think it's really important, is committing those numbers to somebody. When you're like, hey, these are a really important metric to us, Ben, I'd like you to keep track of that for us. And every time we come, I want you to come and speak in an educated way about these numbers, because that way you can begin to parse out different numbers that are important. And then you can give people ownership of those metrics. And it just raises the bar of intensity. I remember when I first started working at this credit union here locally, before I started Collab Team. And they brought me into this leadership team meeting, and they gave me a metric they wanted me to speak to every week. And I didn't know for shiz what the number even meant. Like, it was some, you know, banking term that I had never heard before. And I remember I had to present on it the first week coming up that I was gonna have to present on it. And I was so stressed to talk about this number, because what if people ask me a bunch of questions about what this number means? And it caused me to really dig into understanding what cap ratio meant on this like particular credit union application in a banking term, so that I would understand, oh, that's why it's important. Oh, that's why it matters. But I never took it so serious until I had to own it. Like, I didn't have to own it. You show up in a meeting and it's like, wah, 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 wah. I mean, like, they're talking about numbers and you're like, whatever, I can check out. This isn't important to me. But I think when you can say, these are the consistent numbers that are important, there's our girl.
I was just going to say, yeah, on that L10, I was like, oh my God, I have to know these numbers. I have to be able to compare myself. Like it gets me anxious and it makes me dive in when I have to talk on them. So I can attest to that.
No, I think it happens to all of us. Like nobody likes rolling into a meeting and looking like a jackass. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody likes rolling into a meeting and just being like, when you get asked a question, you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Like nobody likes that feeling. So I think when you can assign numbers out to people, it helps them to be accountable. It's almost like they feel like they need to own that, almost like it becomes theirs to own. And I think it's important, you know, even if it's not only theirs to own, you can make them somebody you can call alongside of you to call people to attention why this is important. You know, like numbers that are important to Tasha, she's going to come and speak in an educated way on, and then she's going to be able to call other people out to why this number is important. But until she understands the numbers, until I understand the numbers, until any of us do, and until we own them, it becomes just numbers on a spreadsheet, like you were saying, Drew, or trying to speak spreadsheet language. That is overwhelming for a lot of people. Like spreadsheets don't come natural to most people. But when you can show them, hey, these are the most important metrics and this is why, I think you get so much benefit out of it. Final thing, actually the final two things, and then I'm going to show you the example of how we do meetings. I would say another really important thing to meetings is accountability. I know one of our clients that we met with, when we first started rolling out this system, EOS system, they said, we always had great meetings. It's just, we all got around and talked and had all these great ideas. And we left and they were great ideas and they never went anywhere because nobody captured the deliverables. Nobody understood who was going to be accountable for what. And when one person's not in charge, when one person isn't given something and saying, hey, you bring this back to us by next time we meet, everybody's kind of like, oh, like, or ducking it or dodging. I mean, like, everybody's like, I hope he wasn't looking at me. Like last person we looked at, that's the one that's responsible for it. You know, until you can understand, no. We need to give assignments to people on the backside of meetings to say, okay, these are the things discussed today. This is the chase forward of, in a week from now, Ben, I'm going to come and I'm going to ask you, was this done or not done? Drew and I just sucked it on our meeting with Human Being Reno on to-do, like on the agenda. We got a 25%. Now I will say there were only 4 deliverables and Drew and I owned all 4 and only one of them got done, which gave us a 25%. But I think that when you can start breaking down who owns what and who's going to feel like a jackass when they roll into this next meeting and have to admit, dang it, I didn't get my to-do done. I think that accountability is so huge. People need it. We all need it, right? Because we avoid the things we don't want to do. Drew?
100%. I agree. It's part of the self-discipline thing, you know, and once you learn how to manage yourself, if you don't have an outside source making you do it, it's hard to learn.
Especially on things that maybe are confusing or don't know. Tasha, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on the other spectrum, it feels nice in a way to be recognized, you know, like, yes, I'm doing my work. That is what I get paid to do, but it almost feels like you're accomplishing something too when you're being held accountable. For me, you know, I work in Reno alone. So if somebody wasn't holding me accountable, they would never really know what I was doing down here. So it feels good, you know, to just have a team and not look at it as like a negative thing, but just like a way of functioning is nice.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a really good point. Because I think if we've talked a lot about in Coffee Experts, recognizing your people, but it's hard not to make that just wholly subjective when you're not really talking anything in specific. It's just something that made you feel good. I like this person. Maybe I get along with this person better than I get along with that person. Therefore, this person gets a lot more of my praise than that person does. But when you can see, no, these are the things being accomplished by people, it can cause you to have even a greater appreciation to somebody that maybe would not have gotten the limelight. You know, there are big personalities and there are small personalities, but we all get stuff done. You know, and when you can give people a metric way to track, hey, this is the kind of things that we're getting done. We got 75% today. Who was responsible for getting their to-dos done? Oh, Tasha got all of her stuff done, and Aaron and Drew are losers. Like, I think it's like a good opportunity to say, man, Tasha's a badass. She's good at what she's doing. Man, praise goes to Tasha for getting these things done. I think that's rad. It's a good point, Tasha.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about consistently is the mystery of what motivates people these days to work, and a place of belonging is one of them. But I think accomplishing tasks is a big thing too. When you feel accomplished, you know, you want to keep doing that thing because it made you feel good because you did it well and you got it done.
Yep. It's good. I love it. So we've talked about important of consistency, right? Consistency in meeting times, what you're doing, what you're looking at, same speak. We talked about accountability. We talked about specific metrics. I think the final big one that I would say is really important to include in your meetings, whatever structure you use. I'd say the last thing I would say that's a really important thing is to move forward your big initiatives, right? Like it's so easy at the beginning of the year to say these things are so important to us. You know, the visionary especially feels this just super big obligation to show up well at the beginning of the year to say, this is where we're going. Let me vision cast for you. Let me get you excited. And like businesses need that, Drew. You and I have had a lot of conversations about businesses without that fall flat. It just becomes mundane. It's like, this is such a boring place to work. Why would I want to stick around here? You want that like excitement of we're opening new locations and we're pressing into this part of the city, or we have this new initiative that we're rolling out, or we've got this cool new thing that's coming out in fall this year or something where it's like the visionary's got these vision, but unless you keep the visionary accountable with that vision, it can be more of the same, of just a real jerky experience where it's like you're getting whiplash trying to keep up with what was the big thing we were working on this month, and then they roll and they're like, no, this is even better, this is even a bit, I've got a better idea, and you're like, whoa, you've given me like 10 better ideas this month. I don't know like which one is the one I'm supposed to track with. And I know, Ben, you experienced that at a very intimate level for a lot of years. Do you want to speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's hard to keep up. Like, and at some point you go, okay, like, are you just crying wolf again? Like, is this like that? I got to that point. I was like, okay, I'm actually not going to start this.
I remember that
at all. I'm going to wait like 2 or 3 weeks to even start anything on this, because guaranteed about 2 or 3 weeks, this is going to change. So I'm just going to sit on it. And when it didn't change, okay, good. Okay. So we're doing this. We'll move forward with it. But very often, yeah, it would be like, this is a thing. Then 3 weeks later, never mind. It would be like, well, I'm glad I started that.
That's right. After I built out this whole way that we could track it and rolled it out amongst all the team and told them it was really important to bring it back. And then I came and bring it back to you and you're like, oh, I was excited about that for the moment, you know, and it's like, dang it, dude. No, that's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for consistency. So I think, it's super important to have ways that you can just track, are we heading towards goal? Like, what was our goal at the end of this year? And are we taking strong steps towards that every single quarter to get us through, so that every single time we're seeing progress? And then breaking down even those quarterly rocks down into milestones, I think is super helpful too, where you're like, hey, I have these 3 key dates that I'm going to move my rock forward so that by the end of this quarter, I know what it's done. So I think all of those things are super important. And then finally, just a way people can triage issues, right? And that isn't a way where somebody just runs away with the whole meeting, right? Like, we've all been in those meetings where somebody runs away with the meeting because they thought this is a really big issue, but really, in all honesty, when stacked against the rest of the issues, it probably was low. That was a low importance, you know, and maybe this really important thing didn't get addressed, even though it was more important because that person wasn't more verbal and they should have just stepped forward with their issue, but they felt bad interrupting Sally, who always is really verbal and is a verbal processor. You know what I mean? So anything she thinks, she says, and then she talks everybody's face off for 20 minutes, and then somebody adds something in, and then it's like gasoline on the fire. It just made her go even further. And it's like, we just burned a half hour. That's all we had. Sorry, guys. I hope you guys had a good one. We spent the whole time talking about punch cards. No, like that's not where we should have gone with that. So I think giving people a space where you can triage through issues and prioritize issues, I think is really important. So we're going to talk about today EOS. And I know, Tasha, you're very familiar with it now. We've been doing it for several months. I would love your feedback as we go through just things that you've seen where you're like, hey, I've really appreciated this about this, because you're a really a great test case for us, where you're like, hey, this is what I've liked about it, but also for you to say, and these are things I think maybe could get better about it, or questions you have. You're like, I know you've been asking lately about, should I be rolling this out with managers, and could we make this part of a manager meeting? So I would love to have just like a working meeting through some of that too, of like questions, answers, back and forth. But I'm going to share my screen so we can kind of look at it together. Who's this good looking dude right here? Look at him smile, such a smiler. Okay, let's move on. Alrighty, so this is an L10 meeting. EOS, Entrepreneur's Operating System, leans into what they call level 10 meetings. And the whole reason we're showing you this isn't to say you have to use this system to run your meetings, but I would say you need a system to run your meetings.
Yeah.
And did you drop our Slido?
Yes, I can right now.
Never do ever anymore. Dude, I feel like, wait, you know what I bet I have? Yes. Yeah. Anyway, if you have questions, you can drop them in the Slido if you want, or you can just talk about it at the end. We advocate for level 10 meetings because we've seen them work. It seems like no matter what we're talking about, no matter what industry we've rolled them out in, attorneys, breweries, coffee shops, online entrepreneurs, people doing real estate, people doing selling on Amazon, like all the craziest. We've been inside of so many different business models and rolled out L10 meetings, and it just works because all you're doing is giving your people the opportunity to have same speak about how they identify things. We know this is where this part is going to be spoken about. This is when this part is going to be addressed. I can save my questions till the end because I know in issues is when they're going to want to talk about this. And if you can create just a cadence of the way that you talk about things, people can hold on to things till the right spot. And it cuts down a lot of the needless chatter of people blowing up your texting feed or your WhatsApp feed or your Slack feed, however you're communicating in the instant messages. You can tell them, hey, will you do me a favor? Will you drop that in the L10 this week and we'll talk about it in issues? And then it's a good spot for people to store things, knowing their issues are going to be addressed by the end of the week, unless it's a fire burning down. And then that should come to you on instant message. But it also trains people of, if this isn't an instant message situation, don't blow up the feeds. Like keep the feeds to be what the feeds are, and that is something's burning down. So L10 works. This is the steps of a standard L10 meeting. It's segue, scorecard review, rock review, customer employee headlines, last week's agenda, and issues. Like that's an L10 meeting in total. It should take about an hour. You can stretch them to an hour and a half if you need an hour and a half. The team's big enough and it justifies it. Sometimes when you get big teams, your issues need more than 30 minutes. But most of these segments of each meeting should take about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 at most. And then you save the majority of your time to work through what are the pain points facing your business and your issues. Most people just need someplace to go when they can talk about issues, and creating space where it does that. So we usually typically start off with the segue, which is personal and business best. And I usually call that the human moment, where let's just go around the circle. Let's go around the meeting and let's just talk about something good happening in your life personally and something good you're feeling about in your business, right? Start out with positive energy and just going around and letting people talk. It doesn't have to be the best thing. It doesn't have to be some greatest thing in the world. It's just, hey, what's something good going on in your life? What's something good going on in your business? That to me keeps it human. And so it's not just like straight into business, straight into numbers, straight into all we ever talk about is what's going to benefit us as a company, rather than, no, what are you excited about as a person? Do you guys have thoughts? I'm going to give you guys a little room to talk about each section as we go through it. What are your thoughts on human moment?
Yeah, I've been in meetings in the past where it's like you sit down and the first thing is, all right, what's everybody dealing with? And immediately everybody's just like, ugh. Like just it brings the meeting down because it's not like, hey guys, how's it going? Or what's going on in your life? That's cool. It's like, okay, what's going wrong? And the meeting just goes, and everybody just doesn't want to be there all of a sudden because it's just negative. Starting off a meeting negative is never going to work for a meeting because you're immediately going to have your people go, oh gosh, now I got to talk about all the crap I've been dealing with or all the issues I have right out the gate, and I'm not prepared to do this.
Or a lot of times I think a visionary can come to a meeting and feel like it's their chance to really open up the payload on people. You know what I mean? Like all the reasons people are doing things wrong or all the things they want fixed. And when you start down that gear, it's just exhausting. Like it can just suck all the air out of the room. It's so good when we're trying to build culture to show people that you care about what's important to them.
There's not always a lot of time in the workplace to have, personable discussions with people. It's work, your coworkers. So when you have a minute, 5 minutes, is that what we have allotted 5 minutes to go around and talk about, the good vibes and what you got going on in your life. It makes it more of a, human experience.
Me, I found I was trying to do like an icebreaker, or like I was constantly having to like research a question before my meetings to like go in with. And then I felt like people just didn't really give a crap about them. They were like the generic ones. So personal best, business best is just like a guaranteed, it's super simple, straight to the point, and it's personal to them. So I started stealing that.
Nice.
I love it. I think I love it because a lot of times people talk about their vacations. You know what I mean? The bigger the groups that you get, people start talking about places they've gone and things they've done. So I get to hear about Tasha's camping trips. I get to hear about Ben going to Europe and all the fine dining he eats when he's there. Remember, Ben, you remember your first time going to Europe and you came back and you started dressing super chic? Like the next like month or two, you're like, everybody in Europe dresses way better than us. I'm going to up my game.
That was before I actually, where I was still having in-person meetings. And then I went to Zoom and I was like, I only have to buy nice shirts from now on.
I don't even need to wear pants anymore. That's the best part. That's awesome. All righty. So next, after you've talked with somebody about their personal business best, we do get in the meeting, and it does start pretty strong with metrics, and it goes to scorecard. So I'm going to share a scorecard. This is an example. But I think I'm actually going to share Roasters scorecard because I felt like that is the best one when talking about coffee shops. So, I mean, and I don't want to share Human Bean Renos because I feel like that's rude. But I could talk about Roasters because they're in the past and this is in 2021. So going over consistent metrics helps everybody. So this is just examples of consistent metrics. You can see we've assigned different people out. Jordan was over HR, and so she had a lot of things that were HR metrics. Stephen, spoke to a certain metric because he was also doing, we just felt like that was too much for just Jordan. So we broke it out to Stephen. I got to talk about total sales. Stephen came back and talked to us about like essentially item sales, transaction counts, ticket counts, average transaction. Cody would talk about our roastery and how many beans and bags of beans he's putting out the door. Mason would talk about average car times. Jarek would talk about this manager checklist scores and the customer complaints. And what that did was it gave us, hey, each one of these metrics are really important to us, and we're going to come and speak to them. It also gives you a spot where you can say, hey, these are our goals. Early on, usually when you're establishing a scorecard, I don't know if we did it here. Yeah. Goals will start as just something you begin to ledger. Hey, let's just see how they turn out. And if over time I realize about $7 is where I want average transactions to live, then we can just drop in $7 here. And that's what we did over time when we came back this way was, okay, so what's our average transaction we want people to live at? Okay, greater than $7. And then we just watch that number. But I think that as you go through, it also gives you a spot where you can say, okay, what was our payroll total? And then what was the store payroll total hours? And then what's the total overtime? And that's one, this is a great place to track overtime hours. Like what the heck happened in June? You know what I mean? That we jumped from 20 overtime hours to 80 overtime hours. But look, we were able to correct it by next pay period because we were watching it. A lot of times, if you're not watching numbers like this, especially payroll, they can just fall off the radar, right? People get so deep in the getting payroll done, getting the punches corrected, getting people's time cleaned up. Like that's usually the operations manager's job at some level. And then you hand it off to your payroll specialist. They execute payroll. And then you're just like, thank God that job was done, but unless you're watching numbers, it's really hard to know, are we just burning hours until maybe the end of the month? And then we're like, holy hell, what happened at that store and why did so much overtime happen? But then you're a whole month later. And then by the time you get that into a fixing process, you're 2 more weeks deep. Now you're 6 weeks away from the occurrence. And it's just like, it's so nice when you can just keep one spot. Hey, this is the things that are important. Overtime, average hourly rate, full-time employees in stores, labor percentage, gross to net, like keeping an eye on this number. We really advocate you want to live someplace probably between 18 and 22, so it's great just to see, how these stores were performing. Then we got into how are we doing on our sales? How are our sales compared to last year, same store? How are we doing on item sales count, units sold, transaction count, how many transactions we've got, ticket count, average transactions, discount percentage. It's a great one. Like, are people discounting things too much? Why was there such a high discount percentage? Oh, it was Mother's Day. Like trying to work through orders per day on average. And then obviously we broke it out into labor, sales, and efficiency. So then how many bags are we pushing? This was our total espresso, beans, and then decaf and single origin. So I think our bags, that was bags, I think is what it was. Mm-hmm. So like working through like, what are the key numbers so we can say, hey, Cody, why did we put out so many pounds here versus, or bins here versus here? Oh, that was what it was, bins. How many bins here versus how many bins there? That's how we did delivery. Average car time, we can see, hey, who's sucking it? Oh, wow. G-Way or Drew's managing, that guy needs to get his shiz together, or whatever. Yeah. We're able to really track those metrics. Manager checklist scores, they got so established at Roasters where we actually had invested in a piece of software that would tell us the exact metrics of how many people were doing exactly what they were doing of each one of the things we had on the checklist. And then just customer complaints. Let's check through what are the things being complained about. Do you guys have anything that you go, Tosh?
So sorry. Was this managers looking over other managers' stores? Like when I'm thinking about doing an L10 with my managers, I'd love to task them out assignments, but is that a weird thing to be like, hey, look at how much overtime Longley had, like put you in charge of this, put you in charge of this. Do you see what I'm saying? Also, I don't even know if they have access to look at that for another store, but was that how this was?
This was leadership team. So this was just like
okay, perfect.
Go, Tosh. So I would say we've never rolled them out the way that you're talking about rolling them out, but I would love to roll them out the way you're talking about rolling them out, where each store brings their own metrics. And I would say identify maybe the top 3-4 metrics you want them to be tracking, numbers that they've got access to, whatever those numbers are, and then have them each come in and populate their own set of numbers, and they can speak to them as they go down. Hey, it looks like we had a little bit of an increase in sales this week. We can all celebrate it together. You know, it looks like LY, man, we really took a hit. Like this year, obviously we had a big year last year. Where was that? Where did that come from? I think it gets them deep in their numbers, and it shows them numbers against other stores' numbers. Especially sometimes owners can get weird about numbers. I would say there's nothing to be weird about your gross sales. Like maybe showing everybody all your profit loss statements. Maybe you don't want them to know exactly where all your money's going, but like gross sales, you want them to know where your sales are at, and you want them to begin to control that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to roll this out. It's just fine tuning it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something probably you and Drew could like brainstorm on a little bit of like, hey, I was thinking these, and you guys could have a conversation back and forth. Drew, do you have thoughts on these metrics, or Ben?
I think one of the reasons that it's so good to have, like, what do you call it, same speak? Is that the 1984 reference?
Yes.
Same speak is, well, not only are you getting through your meetings quickly and efficiently, you're coming up with better ways to track stuff. So I know historically I've had to track, different metrics for different reasons. And, when you first start tracking something, it's clunky, it's not as easy. And over time, as you start to track it more, you get into habits and you figure out you can explore your software even more. And it just, it's more creativity in the sphere of how can I get this done faster? Because like Ben said, our time's precious, of course. And how can I get it done more efficiently and effectively? So, the more you get into the habit of doing something, you're going to learn how to do it more efficiently.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, Tasha, as you guys work through your numbers, I think that, car times is something we're still working out for your store because it's being pulled off a spreadsheet. But if Drew's dropping consistent like dashboard numbers where people just know where they're at, they can go back to the dashboard, and that could be the number that they drop here on the scorecard. Because what dashboard does for us is if you take a screenshot and you drop that into a text group or a Slack group or a WhatsApp group, however you're managing your managers, if you drop in that screenshot of the dashboard saying, hey, this is where everybody's numbers are at, that's great for like people chipping their teeth, right? Of like talking trash. I'm doing so good. Right? Are you guys coming up on like, or other people feeling the pressure of crap, I better make my times better. But if the nice thing about a scorecard is when you're watching them like week over week over week over week, you can see variance in a way that dropping them into a feed from a dashboard doesn't give you. And so I think that even if you just took like dashboard numbers like that, and that's all they had, maybe they had no other way to know where their numbers were at, except for a dashboard that Drew's dropping once a week, then you can just grab those metrics and put them into a scorecard like this. Even seeing them side by side all the way across could be really good too. So yeah, I think that's good stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about it before. I love a good competition. And I think, everybody's laundry should be out there. And if it's bad, then fix it. And if it's good, then kudos to you. I use it as a good motivation.
I think it's so good. I think it's because I think you want good people around, right? We always want good people around, but if they suck, you know what I mean? So maybe their energy's good, or maybe they're good at certain things, but we all have things that we suck at, right? We all have things we're all growing, and we want to all turn out to be best versions of ourselves. And until the spotlight is shined on something that I don't want you to shine the spotlight on, I'm probably not going to address it, because I probably would have addressed it by now, right? Like, but if somebody shines a light on something, I'm like, like I wish to God I didn't have to talk about that number. But in having to talk about that number, it makes me own it and makes me move that dial forward too. So I can't just neglect it, because maybe I've got great customer reviews. Maybe, like my sales are doing great, but my car times aren't great. Or maybe there are different parts of it. Like I could be increasing my ticket, my average ticket, by upselling. I was talking to a coffee client earlier this morning, and he was telling me, Aaron, I don't know how to handle it. I know that my manager doesn't like sales. Like she doesn't like pushing like a sales bump, you know what I mean? But we need a higher ticket count. Like we need a higher average ticket transaction. Like bottom line, because that's where profitability grows, is if I can grow this. So if I'm putting a cup of coffee out the window, I need her to say, hey, do did you want to try a coffee cake this morning? Do you want to try a burrito? Hey, we're running a promo right now on this. Hey, did you see we've got the new City series coming out on the hard goods mugs? They look insane. Like somebody that's willing just to, it doesn't have to be hard sales, but at least suggestive sales, because we want to see sales grow, because that's how year over year grows. And that's how we're going to bonus you out and all the different benefits that come downstream too. So I think it's good. Rock review. So next we would always come to quarterly rocks. So the great thing about quarterly rocks in my perspective is EOS's system would say you don't probably want more than 3 or 4 assigned to any one person. That way they're not going to choke out. But what you can say is, hey, where do we want to get by the end of the year? And if that's where we get on by the end of the year, how do we scale that back? How do we design with the future in mind, right? It's not just like random one-offs. Rocks typically are things that can't be accomplished in a week. It's going to take probably several weeks, probably several months, but we're going to make them bite-sized pieces where we're like, hey, let's break this piece off and roll this out. So one of them for Human Being Reno this last round was developing a manager incentive plan, or a way that we can recognize managers, recognize Tasha for being a badass. We'll recognize these people in a metric way. So it's not just like feel goods. You know, we've all come out of cultures where the guy at the top just gave people bonuses based on feel goods. There was no real reason, no real rhyme of why that person just got huge raise versus this other person that didn't. We've jabbed at Drew about that in the past. But I think when you can say, okay, so we've decided we want to increase our company culture by making things more metric and recognizing our people more. Okay, how do we do that? Okay, giving them some sort of manager incentive plan. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, so that starts with develop a manager incentive plan. And then the next, so that's Q1, we develop it. Q2 is roll out the management incentive plan. So we begin getting people comfortable with the numbers we're going to start holding them accountable to, and comfortable with the dashboards we want them to be looking at. And then the next one is hold people accountable to manager incentive plan, you know, where it's like a 3-part rollout. And it may feel like, wow, it's going to take us 6 to 9 months to get this out there. But if you want it to take, and you want people to get it, you can't just like roll it at them and just be, okay, we're gonna start holding you accountable to this. I know Tasha, you had verbalized that early on when we started talking about this. Hey, but I feel like we need to help them to understand, right, before we just start telling them we're gonna start docking their pay if they don't show up the right way. And I think that's so important. It's so true. You don't want a culture of just like cutting people off at the knees. But the way that happens is with intentionality of saying, this is our long-term mission. This is where we want to get this year. This is it broken down into bite-sized pieces. We recognize this is a project that's probably going to take more time than just a week. So let's assign this out to Tasha and Drew and Ryan as a company rock, and then, but still associating one name with it. And so I think we gave it to Ryan, you know, as the, you know, operations manager, you know, and so Ryan owned it, but Ryan's going to need all of our help to get it across the finish line. That's what makes it a company rock. Other ones, Tasha just banged out some crazy good rocks this quarter of things that had been kind of cumbersome over time, and we just applied some focus on it, and we dialed some things in, and it feels so good at the end of a quarter to be able to come through and see everything dark green. Now that was complete. We got it across the finish line. Do you guys have any things you want to add to that or thoughts you'd like to share?
Definitely on like, it kind of goes back to like your jerking theory. You know, I feel like before the collab team, we would rule these things out and they were great ideas, but maybe we were rushing into them or we weren't fine tuning them. We're like, oh, this just isn't working. And we would just get rid of them versus actually just spending the 6 to 9 months and looking at it like a rock and hitting those targets and those pinpoints along the way to make sure it was going to stick and that it was something we really were wanting to push through in the correct way. So spending a little more time on it, having it take multiple quarters, it definitely pays off in the long haul and seems way more professional and organized as you're ruling things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the rocks is a really good tool too for your team to come together, because everybody's putting their ideas for the rocks for the next quarter on the bottom of the sheet, and you know, have a meeting once a quarter on you know what those rocks are going to be. It's really good for your team to come together and collectively decide, like, is this really important? Like, I think it's a rock, but I mean, maybe it's not. And you get the rest of the team going, no, dude, you've been talking about that for a year. We said a year ago that we don't want to do that. It's pointless. Stop bringing it up. And you go, okay, well, it's not important then. And I mean, that's happened to me before. I'm like, I think this is really important. I think this is really important. We should be working on this. Everybody else goes, no, dude, that's not that important at all, actually. Okay, so I'm now going to save myself from wasting time throughout the quarter working on this.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, I got it done. Everybody's like, it didn't need to be done in the first place. I'm like, great, I wasted all that time. So it's really good just collectively for your team to come together and agree on, okay, what is important to our business? What is worth spending 3 months on? And if it's not worth it, maybe we should just not implement it, or maybe throw it on the back burner for some time down the road, but it's not important to our business for the next 3 months.
That's good. I think too, like, and Drew, I want to hear your thoughts on it too. I'm going to try and look up this real quick and see if I can get there fast enough. Roasters, rocks. Oops. Helps if you're on the right line. No, I don't have my rocks up that easy. Anyway.
I think the rocks are great because oftentimes, I mean, I would come up with ideas for just my shop, and it was before we use this, and it's like, okay, like I have this idea, I have this goal, like how do I get there, you know? And if it's like a big ambitious goal, and I don't have a way to you know, track it and write it down, break it down into smaller, you know, pieces and less accomplishable. It makes it more accomplishable. And if it's just this abstract, you know, idea floating off in the future somewhere, it's harder to get there. You know, you don't have a path, you don't have stepping stones. You can't pull in help on, you know, maybe a little side project that you need done that isn't in your skill set. But having a place where you write it down and you break it down into milestones, and you can figure it out, you can bring in all the minds into it together and, you know, get to that abstract idea.
I think a lot of abstract ideas we got to via that, because there are those, especially if you're a growing business and you're like, man, I could see we need this and we need this, and oh my God, how do we even get there?
Yeah.
Like having the team help you come up with some milestones to break that into pieces is super helpful.
Yeah, I know that also like not losing rocks, like, because visionaries are terrible at like hidden rocks, like things that they're like, oh yeah, this is also really important. And you're like, bro, we already decided the rocks. It's too late to bring that big of a subject up, you know? And so it really is good. So this was an example of one of the rocks that we rolled, or one of the quarters that we rolled out at Roasters, but we were opening up a new location, and just the realization of, you know, somebody's going to need to own all the different timelines on the smart sheet. There's a big smart sheet. Somebody needs to own construction. Somebody's going to need to own the staffing. You know, we were talking about building out hierarchy, you know, at eliminating redundancies, like creating lines of communication, creating a compensation structure. But then as you roll down, you know, like obviously we had a big team on the leadership team level. So, you know, different people were assigned out different rocks. Looks like Ben got stuck with rock 4, even though Derek said he was going to own it. And then, you know, like just going through and being able to assign things out to people, have them come through and assign out like 3 key dates that are important, so that you can know that those are going to get to complete. I think it feels so good to look at a sheet like this and just say, this is freaking badass. Look at how many things that we accomplished this quarter just because we put intention on them, just because we decided these are important things and we need to dial them in. So I think it feels good when you can get your quarterly rocks to a place where you're like, hey, we're heading this direction. This is where we want to be. We're going to sign these out. And it feels so good to be able to mark to complete, and things that are off track, like this one, we didn't end up opening that within that quarter. So we didn't want to hire on all those people. So it just comes to off track and it rolls into next quarter and it becomes part of next quarter's rock. So I think quarterly rocks are a really pretty badass way to make sure you're making traction and moving forward. After you discuss rocks, we always come back to customer and employee headlines, good, bad report. This is just 5 minutes to say, hey, I don't necessarily want just like the one-offs. I want to see a trend. Like, what are there trends going on so we can address it? Hey, is there a consistent problem we're seeing across one of our stands? Is there a barista that's a consistent pain point? Is there a manager that is just sucking it and not doing well? Did we have a manager that quit this year or this week? Did we have a manager that we promoted this week? Like, this is an opportunity where multiple fingers of the business may all be touching different things. And it's nice when you can collectively come all back together and say, hey, these are some of the things we're experiencing in my district. These are some of the things we're experiencing in my district. This is what I'm experiencing on an HR perspective. This is what we're seeing on a growth perspective. Maybe I come in from working with the CEO a lot, and I've got a whole bunch of perspectives that nobody else on the leadership team necessarily has. Just an opportunity to be able to speak into good and bad report. What are some complaints we're hearing that are consistent? What are some successes we're hearing that's consistent? I think it's a good spot for it. Anything you guys want to say about that?
It's like the segue. I mean, it's just a good time to like bring everybody back in. You know, you just got done going over your scorecard and your rock review, and maybe you're off track on all of that, and you just feel like a piece of crap and like, man, I sucked it this weekend. But sales are really up in my district right now, so that's good.
I love it.
Yeah, it's nice. We sometimes forget, to give the praise. So when you have the good headlines, those are important to highlight too.
Yes, absolutely. So then last week's agenda, I don't have a good example here. I'm just going to grab real quick again from an old agenda at Roasters because it's easy and I don't have to worry about sharing proprietary stuff. So the way that your agenda should work is there should be multiple tabs down here on the bottom of how you're seeing week over week performance. So I should be able to grab any of these at any point in time and see how many were done versus not done. This is the accountability, right? This is what comes out of issues. We haven't talked about those yet, but that's the final step in the agenda where you're going through issues for 30 minutes. You want people to come into their issues list and be listing out issues that they're facing from their area of the business, assigned to a certain person. What's the purpose? Do I need to share info? I need info. I need have a decision that is needed. And the sensitivity, is this critical or can it wait? Or is it somewhere in between? And then they identify what their issue is. They write it out here. And when they show up at the meeting, they IDS it. We identify, discuss, and solve. So whatever the issue is, the person whose name is associated here comes, identifies this was the issue. We discuss what that point, what we all feel like the best answer is on that. And then the solution is assigning it to somebody that in 7 days, we need to get this done. So Jarek, we've realized that this A3, the Jolt system was what they used for their checklist. Remove A3 Jolts from auto-populating at the stores. It was causing a pain point with the managers. Jarek, make sure you have that done by next week. And whatever it is that we'd be able to say, get this done 7 days from now. And for Jarek to have to come back and say, done or not done. Like, did you get your stuff done? Did you not get your stuff done? Scheduled to have 2 closures across the board. Not all the DMs are able to say that that was done. So it got rated not done. We got an 80%. You're always shooting for 80% or better. Just a great way to be able to hold people accountable to whatever we decided last week was important. Did those become deliverables and did they get done? Do you guys have anything you want to share on that?
I would say this is probably one of the most important parts of the meeting. This is the line between we just sit around and talk circles for 2 hours or we actually get stuff done.
That's right.
And this is what, if you don't have something like this, you get people like me leave the meeting going, glad I wasted all my time doing that.
Right.
Or instead, you're like, holy cow, that was super productive. Like we got this all done in 30 to 45 minutes, incredibly efficient. And we knocked out all of these problems that have crept up over the last week. And, going to the next week, being all overwhelmed by like, oh my gosh, the business is burning down because nobody ever does anything. Because all we do is sit around and talk. This actually will get stuff done, and it holds people accountable to getting that stuff done too, which is super important.
I love it. The only other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer. That's a tool that what I would say the best use of it is to capture issues to be addressed in future quarters. So this is something that we do with some of our clients, usually something we do at the beginning of every year, or just help them identify what are their core values, what's their passion, what's their niche, where do they want to be in 10 years, their target market, their 3 uniques, their proven process, what their guarantee is, and then where they want to be in 3 years. That's going to push them towards this 10-year target, which helps them get down to, okay, so what's the 1-year plan? And what are the rocks that come out of that 1-year plan? The nice thing about the VTO is that it's giving you a longer, something that's going to have to keep being updated every year, but it's also a good spot to drop in. Hey, the visionary comes with some great new idea. Hey, I've got this big thing. I can't wait till we roll it out. And we're like, okay, well, let's drop it then on the VTO for us to look for a rock for next quarter. But all of our rocks are filled this quarter. Like we've got all the big that we can do this quarter. Let's put a pin in that. Let's get through these things we said were important at the beginning of the quarter, and let's attack that next quarter. So the Vision Traction Organizer is a great complement tool, but I would say these 4, the agenda, the scorecard, the quarterly rocks, the issues list, those are the core documents from an L10 meeting. And then typically towards the end of the meeting, after you've gone through each one of these things, you review your to-dos, make sure everybody understands that they can't come next week and say, I didn't understand what you meant when you gave me that last week. It's like, no, either it's done or not done. So tell me if you got it done or not. And then this is just if you want to track your issues that you figured out, because ideally you want your issues list to be crossed out, all the things that you covered that became your agenda items that you tasked out to folks. So you just review, if you want, your issues there that were accomplished, and then you just talk about cascading messages, what needs to be disseminated out to other people that maybe weren't at this meeting, and then you rate the meeting. Score of 1 to 10. 1 sucks, 10 was awesome. You're targeting an 8 to 9, and if somebody gives it an 8, then they have to tell you, I'd like to see our issues. I'd like to see us get through more issues, or maybe I'd like to get more to-dos to done, or maybe rocks seem choppy this time, or whatever it is. How can we make this meeting even better? So that's kind of EOS L10 meetings as a whole. Tasha, I would love to hear just a little bit of feedback from you on how you feel like they've helped HBR, Human Being Reno, and then Drew too. I'd love to hear, I feel like you've rolled this out now a couple of times, going from like no order to a place of more organized order in meetings. I'd love to hear some of your feedback too as we line things up. So Tasha, you start.
Yeah, I think it's just made everything so accountable. It's just helped us stay so organized. Before, before we were doing L10s, it was kind of like we all bantered or didn't really know what was talking about. I would write down some things, and if I got to them, I got to them, or maybe I forgot to write something down. So I think having to go in within that 7 days and input any issues that I do want to bring to the table, and know that if I don't put it in there, I'm probably not going to talk about it. Making sure that everybody is putting in their numbers and just holding each other accountable. I think it's been monumental to the Bean. I feel like we've been able to track our payroll year, like week to week. We've been able to track our year sales easier. We have a few other tools where it's, we're inputting things. And like you said, when you're looking at it here and there, but when you're able to see it week by week, I think it's just mind blowing when you're like, okay, what happened there? What was that reason? And the fact that you can insert notes and comments. I don't know if you got into that, but I love that too, where I can go and check Drew's work on our L10 and be like, wait, why is that? And he has a comment in there. So it's not me asking a ton of questions. It's all already explained.
That's good.
Yeah, I remember back in the day when I first started managing, we didn't have a lot of structure to our meetings. It was fun. I was young, so it wasn't all. It was inspiring to get around and just talk about the things that we did. But at a certain point, it starts to wear on you of the fact, if I was ambitious to make sure that everything that I did was on point, and when there's no metrics that I know of to track, if I'm not taught to look at certain items, if I'm not taught to bring up certain topics, then I'm just going to do everything I possibly can all the time. And I did that for a long time, and it kind of burns you out. And if you know that you have an issue in your store, but you don't know, what the issue is or where it's stemming from, so a system like this, coming together with people where you do have same speak and you can use certain terms and people know what you're talking about, well, you can identify exactly where the problem's coming from. If you're like, okay, well, I have longer wait times in the afternoon, or, why is my store closing late, or why, there's tons of problems. I can go in there and I can work all day, or we can have a meeting structure where I can come in and talk about the things that I'm dealing with, and I can brainstorm with other people who are dealing with the same things. And that way I don't have to work all day, every day. I don't have to open the store, hang out with my mids, and then close the shop with some baristas. We can use trackable metrics to find out, where the problem's coming from. And when we did shift from no real structure to having this structure, it gave people the opportunity to speak, and it kind of makes you speak. When we all want to sit around and talk about our problems, we could talk about our problems all day, and it's not productive. So when you don't have an issues list, a time and a place for people to bring up their problems, the quieter people will sit in the back and they won't, share their opinion. They won't develop those skills of speaking in front of, their peers, really, because usually it's a management team that you're rolling this out with. And when you do get those people, you generally have some really good ideas. They're just afraid to speak up. So I just seen the growth come from having meetings with structure and the opportunities that people are provided to learn about their stores, the tools that it gives them. And it's just been huge. And I've seen, the rollout with Tasha has been fantastic. And she's, innovating and creating ways that she can roll it out with her managers. Because, I've seen it rolled out mostly with upper management. But even with upper management, it helps structure manager meetings as well. So I'm excited to see, how this develops over time to become a more usable tool for managers, and how we can make it more robust for the higher level teams as well.